Thank you guys. I'm glad to see you all again. It's another edition of Bison Break, and this is kind of, this is a little bit of a personal thing for me. I've been reading Jim Trotter's stuff for a really long time. I grew up on Sports Illustrated, and the fact that he's a Bison is just, I mean, that's chef's kiss. So thank you so much, bro. I'm your host, Brendan Witt. You see how I'm already into it. So I'm my bad. I'm your host, Brendan Witt. This is Bison Break. Fantastic. But more importantly, we out here with the legendary Jim Trotter. Like, thank you so much for spending some time with Bison Break, man.
No, bro, I'm honored. You guys, it's funny, people throw around those terms, legend and great and all this and the other. I wish I felt what you guys were feeling. That's not how I feel, man. I feel like I'm out here every day looking over my shoulder like, man, you got to get better or somebody's getting ready to come take your spot.
Look, I really, this is no bloviation. This is not me just blowing smoke, like, for real. Like, I remember reading your stuff in sports stuff. Like, I legitimately grew up on this. And so this is a big time, like, full circle moment for me. Like, no jokes at all. Like, and if you need somebody to hype you up, hey, Bison Break is the place to do it, man. Bison Break is definitely. I see you with the Howard gear. I want that hoodie right now. Like, I have several Howard hoodies.
They, man, people who know me will tell you they think all that's in my closet is Howard gear. I swear to you, everything. I was just in Pittsburgh for 3 days, and I think each of those 3 days I had something with Howard on it, wearing it, and then you see behind me. Let me get it right. The Howard helmet.
Oh, I see it every time when you hop on TV, bro. Like, I'm like, yes, rep that joint, bro.
I used to have a huge banner back there, and then I said it started to fall a little bit. But then I had all these jerseys from Hall of Fame players that I had actually covered, that I had a relationship with, and I said, well, you know what? During the pandemic, it's time to get them out of the bag and kind of do something with them. So on this wall behind me, you got, LaDainian Tomlinson, Damani Dawson, Junior Seau, and then wall in front of me, you got Jerry Rice, Larry Fitzgerald, and Doug Williams. So, and now I don't have any room to put up anything else. So I don't know what I'm gonna do now.
So how do you find out how do you figure who are going to be, like, I mean, all those guys are Hall of Famers. All those guys are legends. But I mean, and I mentioned you mentioned two HBCU guys there. But how do you figure out who's going to be on that wall?
Well, it's more of people that I had a personal relationship with. Like Jerry Rice, I never covered him in terms of up close, but obviously I have tremendous respect for him. Me being a Northern California native, somebody who was born in San Francisco, Jerry's probably my second all-time favorite 49er behind Ronnie Lott.
That's
real. So all of these jerseys are all autographed, which is cool too. The Larry Fitzgerald one, which you can't see, is actually a painting that I was at his charity event in Minnesota. His foundation put on, his father's foundation put on. And I was bidding on this painting of him that was signed because it's a cool painting, and so he starts bidding against me. Well, I can't. I'm obviously not gonna be able to win.
The pockets ain't that deep. you can't hit with Larry, bro.
No. So he won it, and then surprisingly he gave it to me, which
that's kind.
Yeah, it was so cool. So so I had that. So anyway, all of these are people that I've either had a personal relationship with, or, someone that I really respect, like Doug Williams, who I also have a relationship with, but never covered. So I just wish I could rotate all these things so people could see the other ones, because I think it's so important to have guys like Doug never be forgotten by, particularly a younger audience as they come up.
Now, you say you're from Northern Cali, so we have, before we get into the nitty gritty of all the things that you covered and the things that you've seen, this is Bison Break, so we need to know a little bit more about you. So we're gonna ask some non-sports questions, ain't got nothing to do with, just to get to know a little bit more about Mr. Trotter. All right, here we go. Question one: in your grits, sugar or salt, or in butter?
Oh, sugar without question. Hey, you got to understand, everything for me when you talk about food is sugar for the most part. I've got a sweet tooth that's like out of this world. So it's like I've got to have some sort of dessert, some sort of sweet. I had oatmeal this morning for breakfast, and my wife gives me grief because she's like, and I hope we can curse on this, but she goes, "That's that nasty ass oatmeal." So I said to her, "Why can't it just be nasty? Why has it got to be nasty ass?" And
I mean, but it does though. I mean, what? So you have an oatmeal with your sugar? Is what is that?
I'm,
The shake?
no, because I'm conscious of it, so I'm trying to. I don't want to like. I don't want to do the whole thing with KoolAid, adding sugar, adding KoolAid to your sugar like we used to do as kids. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
there's no KoolAid in there. It's all sugar. So,
When's the
but
last time you had Kool-Aid? When's the last time
oh,
you had Kool-Aid?
it's been years. It might
Yeah.
have been when I was at Howard, because we every Friday the former sports information director Ed Hill and we would go down to the Florida Avenue Grill.
Mm-hmm.
On Fridays they would have fried catfish. So we're sitting at the counter one time eating, and they were getting ready to make their Kool-Aid. So they got this huge like barrel, and I kid you not, I mean it's huge plastic barrel. And in it they got the water and they got the Kool-Aid, and the next thing we know, they come out with this huge thing of sugar and just start dumping it in there while they're stirring. And it's like, wait a minute, it's more sugar than Kool-Aid or water in that thing. And but that's how we did Kool-Aid back in the day, man. So
I don't think there's any other way to do Kool-Aid. Like I don't think I think you have to just dump a ton of sugar in. Like it's been a second for me too, but like I feel like if I was to make right now, if I was to go in my kitchen right now and make some Kool-Aid, I gotta have a gang of sugar.
Do
Like
they
it's
still
just
make it? Do they still produce it?
I would assume so. I
I
would think
haven't seen
so.
it in forever.
I mean, because like it was like $1 for like 2 packs, 3 packs,
Yeah.
or something like that. Like it was always, I mean, because that was also the thing, right? Like you could make a lot of juice just off of these like 1 or 2 packs for $1, $2.
Yeah.
So I mean, and sugar's cheap. Like I
And
mean,
then
it
you
was
freeze it. Yeah. You freeze
yeah,
it.
like
Yeah, like a lollipop.
it's a
Yeah.
bop. It's a bop. Still okay. All right. So you mentioned you're from Northern California. How'd you end up at Howard?
Sort of a long story. So at that time, neither of my parents, I grew up single parent household, but my father's in my life, all that. It's not one of those stories. But neither of my parents had graduated high school. So college wasn't talked about a lot in my house. And fortunately, I had a high school counselor. I went to a predominantly white high school, but I had a woman who was Black, who was my counselor, who took an interest in me and was basically, like, you're going to go to college. And our Black Student Union chapter on the high school campus, we went to a state convention that at the time was held down at UCLA. And so one of the forums was on historically Black colleges and university, which I knew nothing about. Again, no one in my house really talked about college. And so I'm at the forum, and up on the dais is someone from Howard who's talking. And the more I listen, I'm like, wow, I'm real, that sounds cool. So I look it up, do some research on it after we leave, and I'm like, I want to go. So I apply. And this is in the spring of my senior year.
Oh,
And
wow, okay.
I get accepted. And unfortunately, I didn't have the money to go. So I spent 2 years. I stayed home for 2 years and got some general ed work out of the way. And then I transferred back to Howard. But that's how I got there. I learned about it at a Black Student Union state convention in California. And it was the first time I'd ever heard of Howard. And when I did my research on it, I was like, that's it for me. And I'm telling you, man, when I got there, again, growing up, going to a predominantly white high school, I just felt at home, and I just felt this sense of nurturing and caring, and that there was an investment in me, that I wasn't just a number or somebody that they were just passing through. It's like they were going to challenge you, they were going to challenge you to learn. And they weren't just going to accept, or my professors weren't just going to accept that you were going to give them an average effort. You were going to have to put in. I remember one time I was in a broadcast journalism class with now the late Dr. Lee Thornton, who was the first African American woman to cover the White House for a major network.
Wow.
And she had given us a quiz, or we were doing something, and had given her the answer. And she said, no, that's not right. And she went on and somebody else said something to her. And she goes, yes, that's it. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, that's what I said. And she goes, no, that's not what you said. She said, you say what you mean. And she meant that the words that I had used in trying to describe this were not right. So it was like stuff like that where they were just not going to let you get by. You know, you had to be on it. Or the late, Samuel Yet, who I wish every journalism student could have taken Sam Yet's class. Just a phenomenal man, and you can go back and read his books that he wrote. In hindsight, man, it's like, look, I graduated in 1986. Here we are, and I'm terrible at math. But how many years later is that? 14 plus 22. So what's that? 36 years.
Yeah. I did the exact same way. I was like 14.
Yeah,
I did the exact same way.
I have to do it that way. And here we are almost 4 decades later. And if you ask me, okay, you could do it all over again, what would you do different? I would say nothing, except I would be there on all 4 years instead of transferring in. I absolutely love my time there, man. And look, we have our issues, but that's family issues. So
that's real. Well, I want to ask, you mentioned being in a broadcast journalism class. Did you always know that this is where you wanted to go?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to be a sports journalist. Okay. Now, the interesting story is by my senior year, I realized I didn't want to go to broadcast. I wanted to go print, and I really didn't have much work in print. And the reason was just the way I am. I'm conservative in nature, and I'm always honest with myself and whatnot. And so I said, I want to be judged on the quality of my work, not how I look or how I sound. And I don't want to be on, 2-year contracts, where I'm wondering every 2 years, am I going to have a job? And I felt there was more stability in newspaper. So again, I'd never really done much work in newspaper outside of writing for the school paper. So when we had our communications fair in my senior year, I basically walked away with 2 offers in the print field because I didn't have that experience. One was a 6-month internship at the Cleveland Plain Dealer, which, they try and sell you that it could turn into a full-time position. Or the other one was a full-time job at the Muskegon Chronicle in Muskegon, Michigan, which I had never even heard of Muskegon, Michigan. So me, again, my nature, being conservative by nature, I said, well, I know that I don't know what I need to know in terms of to succeed at a newspaper. So I said, I want to go someplace smaller where I can learn. And if I make mistakes, in terms of the process or whatever, it's not going to be career ending. And then I can climb from there, as opposed to if I go to the Plain Dealer and I struggle and they say, you know what, we're not bringing you back. Now, what am I doing? So that was the best thing for me. I hear so many young people want to go straight to the LA Times or New York Times or Washington Post. Man, just go someplace and get your foundation. Get your foundation, and then just build off that. And if you're talented, you hard work, all of that, good things will happen.
You said you're averse to risk, but I mean, taking an internship over an actual job, I mean, that's
no. I took the job.
Oh wait, okay.
Yeah, I went to Muskegon. I went to the full-time gig at Muskegon.
How was Muskegon?
It was fine, man, because that's the thing for me. Like, number one, I've never been a partier. I was never a partier in college. Don't drink, don't smoke, all that kind of stuff. My wife will tell you I'm sort of just a nerd. I'm just, I am, and even as a kid, my family would, my grandmother and stuff, they would always tell me I have an old soul. And by that, they mean, man, I'm cool just being at home. I'm not comfortable in big crowds, or being the center of attention. So being in Muskegon was good for me because all I did was go there and work, and try and learn the things that I needed to know to succeed. Because I had a vision of, obviously, I want to climb the ladder. Right. I knew I wasn't going to settle down in Muskegon, Michigan, being from California. So my whole game plan was, what do I have to do to get back out west? And that's what I did. I just focused on the work.
So talk to me a little bit about how you started to cover the NFL exclusively and how that kind of changed what you were doing from, I mean, obviously from Muskegon was a while ago, but like from covering a lot of things to covering just solely the NFL.
Yeah. The thing I will say to you and to any young people listening to this or watching, be honest with yourself. That's one thing I always tried to do. So I knew I wasn't a great writer when I got into the profession. I knew I had a lot of work that needed to be done. And truth be told, I still don't consider myself a great writer, but I feel that I'm a good reporter. So
Mm. What's the difference?
the difference is a reporter can go out and get the information that's all needed. The writer is how you construct it. You know, can you bring in a reader? Can you engage with them? Can you make it, for lack of a better word, readable to where they're not going to put it down after the first few paragraphs, like I can't follow this. And there are so many lessons here that I could give, but as a young writer, what you have to realize is that ultimately one day you have to find your voice. You can't mimic someone else. Like early in my career, I'm reading people, Ralph Wiley, and others, and so I'm almost trying to write like them. And what you realize is you can't write like them because you're not them. You
Right.
have to write like Jim Trotter. And so when I got to Sports Illustrated, that was one of the things, one of the editors there, Mike Bevins, would always say to me, find your voice. I want your voice. That's why you were hired. You weren't hired to be someone else. You were hired to be you. So find your voice. And so I always remind myself of that even now today when I write, that be you, don't be someone else. But trying to remember what, see, I'm so old, I get these scenes off, I get all tough.
No, no. I was just asking you about covering strictly the
Oh,
NFL. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
So the reason I got on that was when I was I went to the San Diego Union in 1989. And again, I was a young guy, didn't feel that I really knew a lot in terms of writing, but felt that I could get better. Well, at some point there in the first year or so, I go to the sports editor and I'm asking him sort of to critique my work and how can I get better to move off of the high school beat and start to climb. I'll never forget. And he told me, he was one of those old school guys, you know, the glasses, the flask in the drawer, the cigarettes, the red pen. And he's from Philadelphia. And he kind of pauses for a minute. And he's one of those guys that doesn't have a bedside manner and says, he said, you know, you're never going to be more than a journeyman. And I was like, wow, you
Wow.
know, and I'm like, well, I know I'm not as good as so-and-so right now and whatnot, but you've already summed up what I'm going to become.
I was about to say, and this is like you graduated in 86. So you're 24, 25
Yeah,
years old at that point.
yeah. So,
Wow.
so I walked out of that office, and needless to say, it was kind of in some ways crushing. But at the same time, again, I'm one of those people who will always look in the mirror first and say, okay, what was said that has truth in it? What was said that you can learn from? And then the other stuff, just put it aside. And so what I took from that is, you know what, I've got to get better. So this was 89 or 90. Well, the San Diego Union and the San Diego Tribune, the evening paper, merged in 91. That sports editor later gets fired.
Oh no, that's terrible.
Someone else takes over. And in the meantime, I'm a high school writer doing some minor league hockey, that sort of stuff. But once this guy is fired, I get an opportunity to do some other things. So I got a chance to write about, excuse me, the National Hockey League up in LA. And then the next year I got a chance to write about the NBA up in LA. We would follow like the Lakers or the Clippers, and then we would travel for the NBA finals. So for a year I got to be the NBA writer for us. And then a year later, they were like, hey, we want you to back up on the Chargers to be the number 2. And so I'm like, okay, could you do that? And then when that's over, you know, get off on the NBA. And then the next year they came back and said, we want you to be the lead writer on the Chargers. And initially I said, no. I said, I'm enjoying doing the NBA. I enjoy going to the finals. I don't have the responsibility of the day-to-day stuff with the Chargers. And then when the lead columnist, their sports columnist, came to me, Nick Canepa, and he's a lifelong San Diegan and whatnot. And he said, he goes, you have to do this. And I said, why do I have to do this? I'm like, I don't have to do anything. I enjoy what I'm doing. And he said, this is the #1 beat at the paper. He said, not just in the sports department. He goes, this is the #1 beat at the paper. And he said, your stuff will be read by, you know, more people than read you now, yada, yada, yada. And he went on. And so ultimately I said, okay. And the thing that was so interesting is that, remember, when I'm covering the National Hockey League or I'm covering the NBA, I'm not with that team on a daily basis. I'm not in the locker room every day. I'm not at practice every day, all of that. So I had never covered a professional team on a daily basis like I would doing the Chargers. And so that was a little, you know, concerning in my mind. And I'll never forget the first day I walked in that locker room when I was named the new beat writer. And it was the off season, and the guys were having their workouts, and so there were only 2 players in the locker room, and one of them was Junior Seau, and they were on the far end of the locker room. And the first guy walks into the training room, and Junior is then walking towards the training room, shirt off, all of that. And he turns and he sees me, and he calls me over, and he says, "Oh, you're the new guy." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I'm Junior Seau." And I'm like, in my mind, come on, man. And then I introduced myself, and he said, he asked me a couple of questions, and then he said, "Look," he said, "take my number." He said, "If you ever need anything, you call me." And so again, I'm new. I'm not. I don't know how this all works in the locker room, and I'm like, man, this dude's getting ready to set me up for something. He's getting ready to punk me. And so there's a part of me that says, I want to call this tonight. And then there's a part of me says, man, don't look like you're, you know, desperate one.
Fresh, yeah.
Yeah, so I waited until there was some sort of news in the off season. It wasn't anything major, but I just said, okay, let me call and see. So I dialed a number. I'm expecting to get like Domino's pizza or something. and it was Junior's voicemail, you know, and he said, you know, leave a message, whatever. I leave a message, and he calls me back later, and that's when I knew the dude was real. And so what he did to me, that was the guy. I've always told the story. He's the guy most responsible for where I am today in terms of this profession, from the standpoint. He taught me how to cover a locker room. He taught me how to cover a team. He taught me how to cover the league. And a lot of people think that means he gave me inside information and scoops. Never did that. He was a guy that was so protective of the team that he would never do that, you know, compromise that. But what he did is he helped me understand the culture of a locker room, the culture of a team, the culture of the NFL. And for that, it's something that I will always be eternally grateful for. And I always take the opportunity to say to people that, you know, in terms of my career, he had as big an impact on it as anyone. And, you know, a lot of us need those mentors, those guys who are going to look out for us in that way, you know. And so I think if you have integrity, if you're honest about what you're doing, you know, and if you don't have an agenda to try and embarrass these people, and there are going to be difficult stories. Junior and I got sideways a couple times, but if you have those things, then there are those who are willing to help you. And he was that guy to help me.
I kind of want to know a little bit more about what it is like to cover a team on a regular basis, because things changed kind of during your, I don't know how long you covered the Chargers specifically, but
8 years.
I do understand that things changed about how teams get covered, in terms of the access that, you know, it went from sports media people being sports journalists. It was only journalists then, but like on sports journalists traveling with the team and being on the team flights and stuff like that, to now there is definitely a separation of that because things just have changed. Like, what do you think, I guess, about the evolution, I suppose, of sports media and how they cover teams now?
Yeah, you're right. Even before I started covering the league, there was a time in the 70s where sports writers would travel on a plane with a team, which is like crazy to me. But the thing, when I first started doing it, what was great is that, for instance, practices were open to the media. A locker rooms, you could get access many times before practice and after practice, those sorts of things.
Wow.
To me, where everything started to change was when the Patriots won their first Super Bowl, and Bill Belichick, was so standoffish with the media in terms of limiting access, limiting what was said, those sorts of things, that when that team became successful, the NFL is a copycat league. And so that everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, but many teams then started to follow the blueprint that he laid out. And all of a sudden it was, well, practices are closed to the media, and the locker room is only going to be open after practice, and it's for 45 minutes. Like when I first got started, or there was a point in there where, for instance, our newsroom, if you will, with the team was inside the building. Then later it was in a trailer, a double wide trailer out behind the fields and whatnot. So you're even further removed from the team. And it's unfortunate, but there's no going back now. There's just so many people. And we had mostly traditional journalists back in that day, meaning newspaper or some radio. Now you've got bloggers, radio, everything. So I get it to some degree, but I think it's unfortunate.
I want to push forward now to where you are now as a member of the media. You've been a proponent of NFL teams hiring Black executives, be it coaches or just in management. You have
Let me rephrase it.
Okay.
I've been a proponent of them hiring the best people, regardless of color. The problem I have is that's not what's happening. And I can objectively say that from this standpoint. If we were to take blind resumes with no names on them, and we were to say, put Eric Bieniemy's resume up over here without his name, and we were to put another coach's name, and I don't need to name them, they're all out there, put their resumes up over here.
I'll see if you're going now.
I mean, any of the recent ones that have been hired, whether it's Matt Eberflus or Nick Sirianni or Dan Campbell or who, you can go down the list. It doesn't make a difference to me. But if you put up the names or the resumes without the names, and you're judging strictly on qualifications, who is more qualified to be a head coach based on resumes? Eric Bieniemy's resume should win out.
Right.
When you look at the two people who were in his position as offensive coordinator for the Chiefs prior to him getting that position, both of them went on to become head coaches. He has not. He's won a Super Bowl. He's had a Super Bowl MVP, a league MVP, a quarterback and whatnot. They didn't have that, but they got jobs. He hasn't. So the only reason I clarify that is some people think that, man, he's just out pushing for Black folk. Well, yes, I am, because they're being discriminated against. But what I say to people when they say to me, well, teams should be able to hire the most qualified. And I say, you and I are in 100% agreement on that. The problem is that's not what's happening.
Right. Well, I asked that, and thank you for the clarification, because that is absolutely the truth. As you mentioned, Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator for number one offense in the league for several years, Super Bowl winning quarterback, all this other stuff. But I wanted to ask, because of your relationship with the NFL now, do you ever feel pressure because you work for the NFL, you work for NFL Network now, and your pinned tweet now is you essentially calling out the commissioner of the NFL, talking about their shortcomings in this regard.
Right.
Just talk to me a little bit about the pressure that you probably face doing that, because those are real life consequences that you're having to deal with now, and for you to still address those issues.
Yeah, man, it's interesting. I've had people say, man, that was courageous of you, like calling out the commissioner or whatnot. And I said, well, first of all, I don't consider it courageous. I consider it doing my job. I mean, as a journalist, part of what we do is supposed to be to hold people accountable, to confront non-truths. And so when the league says diversity, equity, and inclusion are core principles, well, I'm not saying you're lying. The numbers are saying you're lying. So explain to me what's happening here. On the one hand, you're saying this. On the other hand, the numbers are saying that's not true. So now explain it to me. What's going on? Do I feel pressure? No. And the reason is I'm older, man. If I was in my 20s or 30s, I might, if I was just starting out with a family and all of that, I might feel that pressure from a financial standpoint, worrying about my job. And I'm about to be 59 years old.
You
And
look great. I mean, I'm just gonna be honest with you. You look fantastic.
you know that thing, black don't crack. So um, so I'm closer to the end than the beginning. And what I say to myself is there is nothing that I am saying that is not true. That's first and foremost. Everything that I'm saying is accurate as it relates to that. So, which is my job. Um, the other thing is, as you get older, and you will find this out as you get older, at some point in your life, particularly from a career standpoint, when you've had some success and whatnot, you say to yourself, or at least I said to myself, sort of, what is my purpose in all this? You know, and after Colin took that knee and we saw how people were misrepresenting what he was taking a knee behind, the light bulb sort of went off in my head that your purpose is number one, to make sure that the voice of the voiceless is being heard and that situations are being represented correctly. Because I will never forget the first game after Colin, it was written after Steve Weiss, my colleague, Howard grad, he reported that Colin didn't stand. The first game after that was in San Diego. It was the final preseason game. And the 49ers were playing the San Diego Chargers. I live in San Diego. So I was working at ESPN at the time, and they had me cover the game. So we're doing a Sports Center hit before the game. And the host back in Connecticut is setting up the piece, the segment. And I'm listening to him, and everything that he is saying is intimating that Colin is being disrespectful. It's Military Appreciation Night in San Diego. There's a huge military presence here, yada, yada, yada. And now this guy isn't going to stand for the national anthem and this and that. And I kid you not, it was in that moment that I am listening to him set this up that I said to myself, you got to make a decision. Either you're going to let him get away with that, or you're going to correct him and reframe this. And it was in that moment that I said, I'm going to reframe this. And so when he came to me, I basically said something to the extent of, no, this is not about the military. This is not about the flag. This is not about being respectful. This is about drawing attention to the abuse of police against people of color. And it went from there. And so after that, it was like in my mind, every time this subject comes up and I talk on it, I'm going to talk about it within the framework of what Colin was really attempting to do. And so from there, the offshoot became now this diversity issue with head coaches and general managers. And I said, they can't speak, because I'll never forget this. I was at the combine in Indianapolis. And so right next door to where the stadium is and whatnot, there's a mall. And up on I think the third floor is where the food court is. So I took a break from the combine. I went over to the food court to get something to eat. As I get up on the third floor, there's like 6 Black coaches sitting off to the side. And I knew probably 2 of them personally. And one of them calls me over and he said, Jim, you got to do something about this. I said, do something about what? And he said, man, we're not getting jobs and it's not right. And I said, well, wait a minute. I said, I've written about this. I said, you guys are going to have to speak up on it. And he was like, we can't. Because if we do, either we'll get fired or we'll never get an opportunity. We'll be blackballed. And I'm like, wow, I knew it, but to hear them say it, it was like, they're right. Because I had kind of at that point backed off a little bit, like, look, I've done what I can do. And I never forget, one of the coaches was the late Daryl Drake. And Daryl Drake said to me, who I didn't know at the time, personally, I knew of him. And he said, you know what, I'll say something. And I said, wow, okay. I said, well, Coach Drake, let's do this. I don't want you to speak on emotion. I said, let's give this a few weeks. I'll call you. If you still want to talk about it, you still want to be quoted, I said, I will quote you at that time. So he said, okay. So I called him a few weeks later. And I said, Coach, do you still want to speak on this? And he said, yeah. He goes, look, I've had my time. I'm about to retire or whatever. These young guys need someone to speak up for them. So that was really the first story, big story, where I addressed this issue. And Coach Drake came out and talked about the inequities and the unfairness and whatnot. And then it just built from there. And I've said to myself now, I don't know how many years I have left in the business, but whatever time I have left in the business, it is going to be devoted to shining a light on these issues and to giving a voice to the voiceless. And if that means that I lose my job behind it, then I lose my job behind it. You know, I'll get another job. But it's more important to me at this point in my life and in my career to make sure that someone is speaking up for these men who can't speak, to give a voice to the voiceless and to keep a spotlight on issues of inequities as best I can.
So talk to, if I had a minute to talk a little bit about your time at Howard in terms of you've been able to see a lot of how media has changed from the time you started to the time now. Like, I wanted to ask, how do you feel about athletes now becoming parts of the media and kind of how you're gauging this? Because you went to school for this. You went to Howard to be a sports journalist, and now people, former athletes, more frequently. I mean, there have always been analysts in the booth. I mean, been former athletes in the booth, but now you're starting to see it with, especially with the NBA, with Draymond. I think Patrick Beverley's probably on his way to that sort of same thing. Like, what do you think about people that aren't journalists, that haven't been kind of schooled up in that sort of way, becoming major parts of the media now as they cover usually generally their sports that they used to play?
It's funny, man. When I came out of college, remember, we had no internet. We had, cell phones were like these bricks. You didn't hold them, and you almost needed two hands to hold them and whatnot. When I applied for jobs, literally I had to cut out my stories from the newspaper, Xerox them, and then mail them across the country to newspapers hoping to get a job, as opposed to using PDFs or emails or whatnot. So it was a completely different landscape. The other thing when I came out, in my opinion, is that the lines were brightly defined in terms of conflicts of interest and what you could and couldn't do, those sorts of things. All of that stuff has been completely blurred in today's media world. And I don't think necessarily all for the better. As it relates to athletes, look, they are making so much money now in many cases. They have gotten smart enough to say, I don't need the middleman. And so I can eliminate reporters, create my own websites, my own blogs, whatever it may be, and disseminate my information in that way. And so it's a different world, man. And I look on it and I say I'm disappointed because the ability, I think back to the 70s, as we were talking about earlier, where media are riding on the team plane, and there was this ability to create relationships with the people that you covered back then, and not to be buddy, but just to really get to know each other. But now I think there are so many walls that are set up, and teams try and indoctrinate players to say the media is the enemy. And for instance, I'm at the Houston Texans draft, and they bring in their first two picks, Kenyon Green and Derek Stingley Jr. And the GM makes introductory remarks, and as he's walking away from the podium, so that the PR guy can open it up for questions, he turns and looks at the players and says, less is more, and then laughs and kind of walks off. And I know in some ways he was kidding or having fun, but at the same time, he was being honest that you don't want to give the media too much. And so all of that disappoints me, and it to some degree it affects my outlook in terms of why I got into this. Got into this because of the game that I love. These are games that I love. And me knowing I was never going to be good enough to play professionally, how could I stay close to sports without actually playing? One of the ways was writing about it. So I'm not hating on any players, getting into the business and that, but I also say that media companies have to ask themselves, what are they looking for from those players? If you're looking for insight and perspective from the locker room or the game, yes, they can provide something many times that we can. But if you're looking, excuse me, if you're looking for actual reporting of facts and bringing in two sides of the story and different perspectives and opinions and all of that, there is a place for journalists and an important place for journalists. I just wonder, sometimes with the people who are in charge, do they fully get what they're looking for? And part of it is, look, everything today is a click-based society, whether it's the clicker or the remote control, where someone's turning the channel to you or away from you, or whether it's the clicks on your story. And the media now have become, in my opinion, um, more financially driven than at any point than when I got into the business. When I got in the newspaper business, many papers were family owned.
Mm.
Now you've got hedge funds that own newspapers, and all they're looking for is to increase that bottom line as much as they can. So knowing that, you have people in the broadcast world who are saying, am I going to get more eyeballs on the product that we have by having athletes or by having journalists? And the fact that Tom Brady would now get a deal for 30 plus million a year without ever having been in a booth or worked in the media profession per se tells you that at least NBC is gambling that there is more interest in Tom Brady, the personality, than there is in, having someone who is trained in that field do that job.
Yeah, that's I know several journalists. And it was an interesting response to him getting that money, because obviously he has no larger train. But I think Tony Romo kind of helps set this tone a little bit about having that inside point of view. The quarterback in particular,
I enjoy Tony Romo.
Yeah,
For him to be able to diagnose a play before it happens and to be able to get in the mind of a quarterback, and what he is looking for and what he sees, all of that, there's great value in that. And I enjoy that. Not all of them do it as well as Tony Romo.
that's true.
That's the reality of it. So to me, he brings something that otherwise something that I don't have, definitely, and something maybe that a lot of broadcasters don't have. And that's taking what he learned playing the game and being able to communicate that in real time, to an audience before things happen. Man, he's great with that. But are all former athletes that good? No, of course not. So I think there's a place for everyone. So I don't think I'm not one of, some people still call me that grandpa, old school, get off my grass guy, which I am becoming. I'm not running away from it. But I also believe that there's a place for all of us. Um, what bothers me, for instance, is when I look at ESPN, and it seems like every year for the last 5 years or something, and I don't have my numbers correct here, but they changed their booth, their Monday night booth. And I'm saying, whether you think that the combination is good and enlightens us and informs us, as opposed to we got to get big names in here because we think big names are going to bring big ratings. I don't, this is just me personally. I don't think fans watch games to hear the broadcasters. They watch games because of the teams on the field or the
Right.
court.
I'm about to get you up out of here on this, but I'll add. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this about NIL. There's been a lot of conversations about name, image, likeness for a long time. It's been about a year now. More recently, today, there's been a little bit more static between the coaches as it pertained to Nick Saban, Texas A&M, and then more recently, Deion Sanders and his
Sure.
time at Jackson State. I guess I just want to know, generally speaking, what you think about about this entire revolution, and then as it pertains to HBCUs specifically, kind of how you feel about is that going to maybe level a playing field, or is it going to, like, what I guess, what do you generally think now? What do you think about it?
Well, first off, I have to say, and in full disclosure, I don't know everything about it, because I don't cover college sports. So I get bits and pieces here, and I've not done a deep dive on it. I can say, in general, I am 100% behind players being paid. In terms of the revenues that they bring in for these universities, they should have been paid a long time ago. And it shouldn't just be, old white administrators getting rich off the backs of these young black kids.
Heard.
So I'm good with players being paid. Now, I don't know what all the legalities are and all of the guidelines are in terms of how that's done under NIL, guidelines. So I can't really speak on that. It sounded kind of rich and ironic to have Nick Saban going after Texas A&M,
right,
or mentioning Jackson State. Because I can tell you this, I don't care what he says about the Alabama program. Every program, in some sort of way, there's some improprieties going on that we don't know about. And I know that from friends of mine back in my day who were girlfriends of players at the most prestigious universities, who were playing in NCAA basketball tournaments and whatnot, and who were telling me stories back then about benefits that players were getting. So all these coaches just stand up and say, we've never, and we don't, and get out of here. You all do. You can't monitor what boosters are doing with that many players. So again, I don't know enough to speak out specifically about what's going on with Saban and Jimbo Fisher. I heard what Jimbo Fisher said today, how he came back. I saw
he was strong. He was strong with that comeback.
He was very strong. He was very strong. So, so I don't know. I don't know how it works, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I've seen the stories about University of Texas and players who have done NIL deals. Why are some able to get it and others aren't? Right. I don't know. I just know I'm happy that players in some form or fashion are finally being paid for the work that they're doing.
Thank you so much for spending time. Honestly, I could easily talk to you for even longer, but I just appreciate you making the time. If I gave you just a quick 30 seconds, and you've seen kind of the entire breadth of sports and how it goes. If I gave you 30 seconds to talk to an alum now, right now, or an alum, there it is, an alum right now, about the importance of giving back to Howard, what would you say in terms of their sports program?
Oh, first of all, I would say to you, there are a number of different ways to give back. When people talk about giving back, oftentimes they think financially, and that's not the only way. Some of the ways you give back is by what we're doing right here, is just your time. To me, time is more valuable than money in some situations. So if you can, like, people will be surprised. Like, I don't know about you, but when they reach out to me and say, hey, will you do my podcast or whatever? And I say, sure. And they're surprised by it. And I start to think, why are you surprised? This is what we all should be doing. If I can say something that helps one of you get to where it is you want to go, then I've done my job, and we're all supposed to reach back and try and help bring along the next generation. So that's my way of trying to do it. I understand everyone can't give financially, but if you have expertise in a field, players are not one-dimensional. They're not just players. Matter of fact, I was out these last few days with a former NFL player who, while he was in college, he was an economics major, and he knew that football was only going to be around for a while, so he was already thinking and preparing himself for life after that. Well, if there's something I can say that helps you get along, I have some expertise. That's my job. If there's a player who has some sort of expertise, even outside of football or basketball, whatever it is, reach back and help that next person along. So that's a lot longer than 30 seconds, man. But I'm just saying, we all have something to give, and we all should be giving. And when I say that, I don't just mean financially, because a lot of times people tune out when you say give back, and they think, man, I ain't got any money. I'm just trying to pay my own bills.
That's real.
It ain't just about money, you know. It's about a conversation that hopefully will help that next person make that money, you know.
Heard. Hey man, Mr. Trotter said it the best way that can be said. But if you do have some bread that you want to give, go ahead and go to bisonexpress.org. We have a special right now about Vans trying to get these athletes to and from their competitions. Thank you so much. This has been, it's great for Bison Express, but I'm selfish. It was great for me. Thank you so much.
I got to get there and read this because I didn't even know about that, man. So yeah, so I'll be on there later today. Check it out.
See, if he gonna be on it, you got to be on it too. Thank you so much. I look forward to speaking with you in the future.
All right, brother. Anytime, man.
Absolutely.